Welcome, everyone. I am Renee Murray from the Division of Dance in the Rueff School of Design, Art, and Performance here at Purdue University. I am incredibly excited to be speaking with Conrad Tao and Caleb Teicher, creators of Counterpoint, on behalf of Convocation. Counterpoint is a collaboration between pianist and composer Conrad Tao and choreographer and dancer Caleb Teicher. The duo explore the dichotomy of their different perspectives and artistic practices, expanding their individual expressive capacity through a collective experience. Harmonic, rhythmic, and theatrical counterpoint between the artists seeks to map out constellations linking the disparate traditions, driving the imagination and opening the heart. Tao and Teicher's earlier work, More Forever, is a Bessie Award-winning New York Times Critics' Pick, which was lauded for consistently extending the sonic aspects of dance. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am hoping to start out this interview if you could both share a little bit about your history and background in your respective fields, as well as how you began collaborating with each other. Caleb, could we start with you?
Sure. It's nice to be here. I always like being in conversation with Conrad, which is how we started doing this project in the first place. I grew up someone interested in music and dance. This is the era of NSYNC and Backstreet Boys and Aaron Carter and things like that. But the first thing I studied was drums, percussion. And I really wanted to be a punk drummer. I wanted to be like in Sum 41 or something like that. And then I saw tap dancing on television when I was 10, and I thought, that looks fun. I'll take a dance class. And it sort of snowballed from there. And I find myself many, many years later, primarily working as a dancer and choreographer in a sort of music dance hybrid environment, meaning sometimes the dancing I do is seen as a sort of concert performance, and sometimes the music I'm playing is seen as a dance or dance theater performance. So it's been a journey of that, primarily in jazz, diaspora dance forms, vernacular jazz, Lindy Hop, tap dance. But I've also done some work in musical theater and contemporary dance and postmodern dance for a moment. So I've just been kind of like a lot of other dancers in New York, doing a lot of different things and learning a lot along the way. And through my various journeys, at some point I met Conrad because we were both finalists through the National Young Arts Foundation. Conrad was there for music composition, I was there for tap dance. And I think I'll probably kick it to Conrad, who can maybe finish that story and tell his own.
Great. Yeah, so I'm Conrad. I am a musician, and I have been some sort of musician my whole life. And like that really isn't much of an exaggeration because I don't remember starting. My parents have told me, and also we have both told the public and the press for years now, that when I was 18 months old, I found my way somehow to the piano bench. We had an upright Baldwin in our house. My sister, who's 5 years my senior, was taking lessons with the neighborhood piano teacher. And so I guess I found my way to the bench somehow and started picking out nursery tunes. Mary Had a Little Lamb is the first thing that they remember hearing me try to like pick out one note at a time. And I had been listening to nursery tunes on a boombox in my room at the time. And boombox and sync were just loading up on 90s signifiers, aren't we? So I mentioned that I don't remember starting because I think that has contributed to the journey I've ended up taking as a musician and as a professional musician. Because because I got started early, I also I kind of on a small scale at first, but I was kind of funneled into the sort of child prodigy pathways that exist out there. So I got early training. My first ever piano teacher was a family friend who was nice enough to give lessons for free. But when I was 5 years old, my family did move closer to Chicago from Urbana-Champaign, which is where I was born, to Naperville, Illinois, which is a suburb of the Chicago area. And the one of the main reasons for that move was so that I could be closer to the Chicago area, and so it would be easier to have like high level lessons with really great teachers. So so that started when I was 9. I moved to New York City with my family for my mother's job. But it was good timing to enter Juilliard. And also just being in New York, period, New York is a bit more of a pre-professional space, let's call it, when it comes to the performing arts. And so I started working in the industry when I was 12, and never, and really still to this day have never stopped. However, all of that is to say that a lot happened very early, and also um, I don't remember any origin for it. And and so I think what has become important in all the years that I've spent working in the field, playing concerts, doing work, meeting peers, just kind of putting in my time, so to speak, um, it's become a big priority to feel like I am owning this life,
Mm.
and to feel like I'm choosing it on some level, because I think that there's this part of me that wonders, and feels unsettled by the possibility, the question of, and the possibility, um, that this is just what I know how to do and therefore is what I do. I think for me, it was really important to find some path to basically feeling agency
Mhm.
in the work that I was doing and the choices I was making, and what have you. So, in a way that feeds into the collaborative story, because as Caleb mentioned, we first crossed paths in 2011 as part of Young Arts Week, which is put on by the National Foundation for Advancement in the Arts, and the Young Arts Foundation in Miami. And it's a week-long program of just youth art making, and it's over 100 people, possibly a lot more now. I think, if anything, I think it's grown since we did it. Um, but many high school aged artists who are working in very different disciplines, so music, dance, but also cinematic arts, visual arts, design, literature. I know I'm forgetting some as well. So that was that hit at a perfect time in my life. I had already been beginning some of my own personal exploration of what else was out there outside of my own artistic context and education. And young arts kind of like came in and was just like, not only is there all of this work out there that you're not familiar with, but also it's being made by your peers, by people your age. And so I think that hit a similar part of me that is also the part of me that's like always wanting to feel like I'm earning my choices, and that I'm really like making my choices. Um, and I think it really lit something in me. And Caleb and I became aware of each other's work then, and organically, again through Young Arts, had the first chance to collaborate on a short little piece called Leaves that I composed, for tap dance, piano, electronics, cello, and a big table. And in a lot of ways now, when I say that out loud, I'm like, oh, that does really pave the way for everything we've continued doing But it wasn't until several years later, between which we both were based in New York City, and we were both working as young performing artists in the city. We were both kind of like building our our our, our portfolios in a way, um, and we're becoming friends. So I think that that's a really important component to all of it. Before More Forever started, before Counterpoint even was a glimmer on the horizon, we were starting to become friends.
Nice. And can you share a strength that you find in Caleb that you admire
Ooh,
or appreciate?
oh, I love that question. Oh my gosh. I think, well, there's so much. The I really admire the way that Caleb is both like is super committed to the process being one where like standards and respect for everyone are not at all opposites. And in fact, they've cultivated an environment where, where people really want to show up because, first of all, they're usually very happy to be there. But second of all, because like showing up is part and parcel of the respect that they're afforded, and there's like a lot of light effort. I don't want to say just effort because that makes it perhaps even sound willful and stuff. I don't think it's actually like aggressive effort, but it is thoughtful. There's this effort put in to basically just establish a space where everyone's mutual respect is really like a given. And I wish I could speak about this and say that this is not that remarkable. Um, but unfortunately, it is. So I really, yeah, that's the first thing that comes to mind.
That's awesome. Caleb, what about you for Conrad?
When I'm having a tough day, I'm just gonna ask if you could send me that soundbite of Conrad saying those nice things about me. Um, uh, I don't know. I've grown. So Conrad and I met in 2011. It's 2023, which means that from our first encounter 12 years ago to our first collaboration 10 years ago to our kind of deeper project together, which began in 2018. Um, I feel like I've grown so much, and I've watched Conrad grow so much, and um, it's a little rare to, at least for me, to feel like I get to see someone so frequently across a career, across now almost a decade, and I'm just so admiring of how good Conrad has been this whole time, and also how he's not hemmed into that same kind of good. There's a sort of restlessness to Conrad's artistry, um, which is, Conrad could be, even if Conrad, say, was playing Rhapsody in Blue in 2013 when we met. It's possible that you were, because it's kind of a hit, and is playing it in 2023. Conrad's perspective on it has grown over that time because Conrad as a person has grown over that time. And that's really inspiring to me as someone who again just is really interested in continuing to learn. Um, Both Conrad and I are sort of old hats at our young ages. Are you 30 now, Conrad? Or are you 29?
How dare you? Almost.
Okay, you're
In a
almost.
few months. Yeah.
So I'm 30. Conrad's 29. Um, and yet we've both been working for so long that I think sometimes we feel like old hats. We feel like we've been in the quote biz of being an artist for so long, and yet and that can be very tiring or taxing. And yet I continue to see and be inspired by Conrad's desire to continue to explore himself and his work, um, and and that lights a fire within me as someone who shares the stage with him and also just shares a lot of meals with him talking about what we do. Um, to 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 keep kind of questioning and exploring and trying new things. Um, and yeah, it's been quite a journey for us. We've now been doing this project for a lot longer than I ever thought we would, and I didn't even really see this on the horizon when we first met. I didn't think when we met 2011, oh, someday I'm going to be doing a 70-minute concert with this artist who I just kind of admired from afar. So that was a long answer, but yeah, Conrad is continues to kind of push me to be better.
Beautiful. Nice. And so you're both creators as a composer and choreographer, and I'm curious about what motivates you and inspires you to make. Caleb?
Uh, a lot of it is intuition. Sometimes there's just something that I can't get out of my head, whether it be an idea for something, and you know, a small idea for something, or a real clear vision that there's something to this thing that I keep thinking about. Whether, you know, in probably the most in probably the easiest way to explain this relationship. Sometimes I hear a piece of music and I think, oh, I'm going to choreograph to that. I don't know when, I don't know how, I don't know why, but I find myself in a sort of career where someone will ask me to choreograph to something at some point, and then there it is, this thing that's been stuck in my head. It's not often that someone asks me to make something, or I get an opportunity to make something, and then I sit down and say, what do I make? What do I make? Usually I say, oh, great, here's the container for this thing that's been rolling around in my head for sometimes years. I'm starting work on a new project this year, that I've been thinking about for 3 or 4 years. And I haven't been working on it for 3 or 4 years, but I've just been thinking about it. I think a lot of artists, myself included, maybe Conrad will speak to this. You can't stop thinking about certain things, and art is a way to sort of process, or to finally explore that thing that has become either an earworm or just an idea worm.
I'm a little bit like that. I identify with some of that. I keep, I mean, it's changed, like actual spaces, virtual spaces. It's changed apps, but I have a very robust note-taking practice in my phone. And I create these kind of demented, often like long notes with just links to Wikipedia articles, or like verbal descriptions of sound worlds. Although, funnily enough, I do that less and less and less now, because I find that that can actually be a weird translation of mediums that is difficult. But like, to just like, a lot of it is just lists and thoughts. Like, there's some unholy union of journal entry and like Excel spreadsheet, and so a lot of stuff is just like collecting thoughts around an idea for a long time, and then like there is this other side that is, um so that's one component, and then there's this other component that is like, I love limits, and I love like containers, and I love like boundaries, because they give me something to relate to work against, to work with, to sort of rub up against, to fling myself against, like all manners of relationship. And so I find that really, really generative. Like, I'm always excited by other people's work, that where I can perceive a container being like exceeded somehow. And to me, that's just a very interesting, meaningful, and also reflects a lot of reality outside the artistic space. Thinking about that kind of tension. So there's a part of me that also really enjoys the process, and then also just realistically has to deal with the process of being given constraints. So time limits, which, I'm bad at adhering to, but still time limits and orchestration limits and these sorts of things, like I find that often very, very like generative as a starting point, or as something that jogs my imagination, or just forces something to get done. So there's these two components. One, maybe if we want to reduce it, like one is very pie in the sky, dreaming, kind of blue sky thinking, and then one is a super practical, kind of like on the ground, like what are my forces, where is this going to be, like that side of it. And I try to make them relate in an interesting way. And then for me as a composer, as a musician, uh the component that I sometimes feel like I risk underrepresenting because it's so fundamental, um is like it has to sound good. And that can mean very, very different things. And I think it has to mean very different things, especially when we're thinking of it analytically and historically. We have to be prepared to take a wide view. However, for me, it is really important that it filters through that thing of like, does it sound good to me? Like, so those are the basic components.
Nice. Thanks. I think it's useful for young artists to hear about process and why we make, because it feels mysterious when they first start, and then it gets daunting. And so I think sharing is really helpful. And so with this process and project together, what was your approach to bringing classical music and tap together?
Um, I should I be honest? I probably um this this the structure of this evening was not our idea. We had put together a much larger work called More Forever that Conrad composed the music for, that involved piano, toy piano, electronics, and involved myself and six other dancers on a 24-foot by 24-foot sandbox that we built on stage and we filled with sands. And uh, that that work was critically acclaimed and toured quite a bit, but there were a lot of places that just said we don't have the resources to take that project, but we love the idea of you two working together, and how about a duo concert? And I think Conrad and I were both really in love with the larger piece we had made, and the first couple times someone asked for us to scale down, we scoffed at it, or we were just kind of upset about it. So we said, why don't you want to pay for this thing that we've spent so much time putting together? Um, and then I think we had like three of them line up, and we said, okay, we'll do three of these duo concerts, and if we don't like it, we'll never do it again. Uh, and I think, and then the pandemic waylaid its premiere, so we did it as a premiere virtually through Library of Congress, and that was kind of funny because it was fall 2020, and I think I was in a weird headspace. I don't know how Conrad was. I don't think anyone was in a good headspace in fall 2020. But then when we finally did the project in person in the theater for the first time, we both came backstage, and I remember saying, "Wow, I really enjoyed that." um, and so we sort of continued on from there. That being said, it was sort of it was a quick process. I think we sat down, discussed what type of music we'd like to share. We played through it, and then we said, okay, well, maybe not this or maybe this. And I think we did it in a few rehearsals, and then we filmed it, the set list hasn't changed substantially since the original, but our sort of perspective on it has changed because we've now done the show many times. So it's one of those pieces that we sort of found through performance, as opposed to rehearsing and really crafting in the rehearsal space and then bringing something fully realized to stage. It sort of happens the other way around. We sort of did a proof of concept in the studio, and then once we got on stage, we figured it out. And now that we've been doing it for a number of years, I think we're still actually kind of figuring out um, what the evening could be. We know what it has been, and it's been very successful, and it's actually just a real joy. As someone who's like really skeptic of the concept of this concert, like if someone said, "Oh, there's going to be a 70-minute tap dance and piano concert," I would say that sounds awful. Why would I want to go see that? And I continue to be kind of surprised at how much I enjoy this show and how much other people really enjoy this show. It's been very surprisingly fulfilling. I hope I'm not saying anything I'm not supposed to say, but it's kind
No,
of a
no.
it's kind of right. Do you feel the same way? It kind of happened very quickly, and then it was good, and we just followed that feeling.
I do feel similarly. I also was hoping that you were going to talk about that angle of, because as I was talking about how much I love like limitations and sort of external circumstances that give you something to work with, um, this that happened for this program in two ways. One is the fact that we weren't dreaming of putting this kind of a thing together in the first place. It was completely because of other people saying like, "Hey, we think there's a market for this X, Y, Z," and neither of us have worked like that before. We definitely don't prefer working like that, and probably realistically speaking won't work a lot like that in the future because these are fairly strong values. However, um the COVID side of it, I don't want to underemphasize because I actually think it was pretty consequential because not just because of the immediate way in which it was consequential that it debuted as a video, but also because it ended up shaping the set list. We were discussing another version of this show, I think in like February 2020. I remember having one rehearsal where we talked about ideas and and some of that stuff stayed. We talked about what role we wanted the music of Bach to play, the Goldberg variations to play. We talked about Art Tatum's importance. Um, but then, before we set that initial set list in stone, lockdown happened, and I think I had certainly been imagining, oh, this show will be fun. This is going to be a fun, boisterous, virtuosic showcase experience for us and for the audience. And I was like at peace with that. I was like, okay, that sounds inherently enjoyable. Um, Knowing that this program was going to debut as a video in the fall of 2020, and knowing that we were going to have the opportunity to sculpt it a little bit, it made me definitely want to engage with that somehow. I think more than anything, I just didn't want us to pretend that wasn't happening. I didn't want us to create a program that felt tonally ignorant of that complexity that was happening in everyone's lives. And so for me, what that meant was prioritizing. I think the show became more contemplative in some ways, a little bit more introspective, and like uh, I was thinking about how, because it was a video experience, that I had no idea what people were listening on. So I had no idea genuinely how the thing was going to sound. I didn't know if people were going to listen on speakers, headphones, their television, their stereo, right? For me, I wanted to explore that feeling, that sort of uncertainty. I wanted to create an intimate experience that no matter where people were viewing it, would sort of be able to speak to an individual viewer watching alone.
Mm.
Um, and I think, of course, we'll never know the alternate version of the show that we had one conversation about. But I do feel like that circumstance played a role in our understanding of what the project would be, what the recital would be, what the program would be, and also what we wanted out of it.
Mhm.
And what's been really lovely is that presenting it in front of people, I don't think that we've diverged from that initial intention of creating intimacy and a kind of like contemplative experience. I also don't think it's not like we abandoned our original goal of making a really fun show. It's also I do think it's totally like a joyous, light and fun experience too. But I do feel like we were able to get to a kind of emotional complexity that, as Caleb kind of was alluding to, it's not necessarily a given. I think I had in my imagination a more explicitly like song and dance, um, will, because both of us have a hammy side, so it's like both of us are going to come and entertain you. And I think I had this vision of the show as being that, and then it became something a little bit messier, and to that end for me felt more real as a result.
Great. I watched your NPR Tiny Desk concert, and I mean, it blew me away. It was amazing. And as I was watching, I just started getting curious about your relationship and the conversation that you're having with each other through piano and tap. And then I started thinking like, okay, who's driving or initiating and instigating, and then who's responding and calling and adding on to. And so I'm super curious if you could share more about your relationships to each other in the work, and kind of how it does it shift, or is there someone who keeps one kind of identity versus the other throughout?
Great question. Genuinely difficult question to answer. One thing that I've often thought about is how much I love that I basically don't see Caleb's feet when they're performing, when we're doing this performance. I've said this many times because to me, it really speaks to how the thing kind of holding, like, the thing that really is our connection is happening through our ears and is very musical. Caleb once very helpfully pointed out to me, they're like, I don't see your hands like either. It's just sort of like
Yeah.
it's like it's an inherent thing. So I guess that's both to like take the piss out of myself a little bit, and then also to talk about how I think that there is a kind of chamber. This is the component of the program that feels most like explicitly like chamber music to me, where it's like where the dimension at which you're connecting is basically not seen, and yet you actually can see it. There are visual signs of it. It's just not explicit eye contact. So that's one thing that comes to mind for me, and what I think is really exciting about that dynamic is that leading and following don't exist as a clean dichotomy, and they don't exist as like they're certainly not roles that you hold permanently at all, and which again is like a lot of life, like actual like real relationships between people, hopefully healthy ones, and so like you have this kind of constant back and forth um in the conversation. The program also has solos and duos both, but especially in the duo stuff, like I think it really feels like an organic push and pull, and and where I can't identify whether or not I'm leading or following, because even in the moments where I am making a choice which Caleb then follows because of something that we've discussed, and maybe they like bounce off of it and that choice affects their choice, that choice I make has been affected by their choice before. And like these are choices that also, this is the sort of live spontaneous component. We talked about the program earlier, which is the more kind of like defined foundation, but the live performance is so live and so like we also can surprise each other. That's another thing that can happen in that sort of social dimension of chamber music making. So that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, everything Conrad said was perfect. I'll just add something that actually Conrad has said to plenty, is that we have a lot of trust, and it makes it easy to feel like the roles we inhabit, who's driving, who's leading, who's following, is anyone leading, is anyone following, are we just in conversation, and finding a sort of um equanimity in that conversation. That's really only capable because of the sort of connection and the trust that Conrad and I have built over being friends, over playing so much music together, and of having done a lot of these performances. And what it means is, uh, it's not just a concert of a skilled dancer with a skilled pianist. It's a concert of the two of us specifically. um and it's we're I'm not doing this concert with anyone but Conrad, and Conrad's not doing this concert with anyone but me, and that sort of connection we've built means that we can be really present and have a really earnest conversation. As Cameron was saying, it's like a healthy relationship. When you feel like there's a lot of trust there, you can really get into a deeper discussion, than just what your abilities or what your skills will allow. So I would say, like, when I'm on stage, that Tiny Desk concert was actually like quite a precarious setup for us. I'm not used to. Conrad's usually on a grand piano, which means that he can face me. But in the Tiny Desk concert setup, he was in upright, so he was looking at me this way, and I had to look this way, and there was a wall behind me, and the floor was a lot smaller than I was used to, and we had woken up at like 5 o'clock in the morning to catch our train, but I knew it's okay because Conrad and I are doing this thing together, and we always do this thing together, and as long as we stay connected to each other and have this artistic conversation, it's going to be fine. And that sort of psychological safety is so helpful when you're trying to be creative. I'm never concerned that we're going to fall off in some way that would be disastrous. Even if we do something that's really risky or really out there, we're out there together. So I know that we're prepared to play.
And you mentioned surprises, being able to surprise each other. And so, is there um, rules for improvisation within your program, or is it open? What are there boundaries?
I mean, I've said this about tap dancers before, because I'm the only tap dancer in this project, but I've choreographed pieces with a lot of tap dancers, and they take extended improvisations. And someone says, isn't that scary? And I say, well, I usually assume that they're gonna tap dance in their improvisation. Like, I don't expect someone to suddenly start reciting poetry or taking off their clothing or doing something really outside of the world. Conrad and I improvise. We were improvising within our existing languages, within our mediums. Um, so improvisation, you know, improvisation has constraints because we're meaning to talk to one another. Um, am I describing this correctly, Conrad? Like, I'm not worried that Conrad's gonna like improvise and his improvisation will be like throwing himself off the piano bench, rolling off the stage into the audience, and like yelling in someone's face. It's not that kind of show.
You know
So
my
I think
taste.
we're
Don't
I
give
think
me
we're okay.
ideas.
I know. But it hasn't happened yet, which makes me think that it's probably not going to happen. And so and also, I mean, the other thing is, like, you take the best improvisational solo of your life. Unfortunately, it doesn't change the world. You take the worst improvisational solo of your life. Fortunately, it doesn't change the world. These things can be really impactful, but they're, at the end of the day, they're a way of playing. They're a way of experimenting, and most experiments are not going to shatter the world.
Yeah.
I
Fortunately.
love that. I love that. I think I just also point out that, like, It's funny that you bring up the improvisation. Like when we started out, that improvisation had some clearly defined pillars. Like it had a rhythmic structure and kind of on its own developed a harmonic structure in some ways. So it had rules. They were never aggressive, but you know, we sort of talked about like here's what we're going to kind of be building on. I don't remember when. I think it might have been like a gig last fall. Like it might have been partially spurred on by like personal stuff in my life that led me to like be very, you know, open to change. But that structure, that little bit of structure that we had initially defined for the improvisation has since fallen away. And so it truly is like kind of a boundless space within our program now, the improvisation. Improvisation is a big component of both of our individual practices in very different ways. And so Caleb is totally right in the sense that like our improvisation is something unique to us. And again, I think it's becoming clear that like the relationship between us is in some ways the subject of the performance. And so the um, the improvisation totally reflects that. But in terms of boundaries beyond that, like no, I think the trust component Caleb was talking about allows us to not have to like very preemptively check in. I think because we really do trust that like if something is an actual issue, we'll talk about it. So it's like, yeah, in the actual performance space, like it's not only is it not scary to feel that little bit of surprise, but it's pretty fun to be like, oh, you did that this time. Let me see. Maybe I can relate to it. Maybe I just let it sit. But like, it's just exciting.
Lovely. My very last question for you briefly is, what do you hope your audience will take away from this experience?
I hope they leave questioning at least one assumption that they maybe had. That's a hope. It's something I just love always. And then I, as a musician, as the musician in this diptych, I hope that they start thinking about music as objects in space and gravity.
Lovely.
I I support that. I think I think performances are a vessel for audiences to feel or think whatever they need to feel or think. Um, uh, this piece of art is not a particular piece of propaganda. We're not. I don't think Conrad nor I like are really hoping for people to get one particular thing out of this. Um, it's just been really nice. We've had a lot of people uh, say a lot of things they've thought or felt from this performance um, over the years, and it's always heartwarming to think that we maybe opened something for someone's minds. So um, it happens to be a very enjoyable labor for us. So it's really a win-win.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. We are so excited to see you all in the spring semester here at Purdue. And Counterpoint will be presented at Loeb Playhouse on February 8th at 7:30. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.